Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly specific foundational concept straight from Islamic texts, the concept of shirk. You know, if you've ever wondered where exactly the line is drawn between having deep, profound respect for something and, well, crossing over into actual worship, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to look closely at what the theology actually says about this boundary and how it applies to everyday life, traditions, and really human history as a whole.
Okay, let's dive right into things with a seriously powerful verse. This really highlights why this topic carries such immense gravity. In Islamic theology, this concept is uniquely framed as literally the sole unforgivable sin if someone dies without repenting from it. While other mistakes or, bad choices might be forgiven, associating partners with the Creator is considered the ultimate violation of the faith's absolute core principle. So that really sets the stage for how seriously this subject is treated.
To truly grasp this complex topic, we're going to explore 5 distinct areas: the definition of shirk, worshiping objects in nature, elevating humans and prophets, the living versus the dead, and finally, the ultimate conclusion.
Let's start right at the top with Section 1, the definition of shirk. What exactly is it?
Crucially, shirk isn't just about bowing down to stone statues. It's actually defined much more broadly than that. It essentially means giving any creation, whether we're talking about a person, a physical object, or even an idea, the status, the power, or the reliance that belongs exclusively to the Creator. It's basically a massive misallocation of divine rights. When you take that ultimate trust, fear, or hope that should only be directed upward and you point it towards something created, that foundational boundary is crossed.
Moving to Section 2, worshiping objects and nature, and the concept of misplaced reverence. Now, what's fascinating here is how incredibly common societal practices can inadvertently cross this exact line. Historically, and honestly even today, people might visit graves to ask deceased saints to fulfill their wishes, or tie threads to specific trees for blessings, or they might carve stones and offer them food. There's also the practice of elevating animals, like cows or snakes, to a completely divine status. And if you think about it from a psychological standpoint, this often comes from a really deep human desire to seek protection from the unknown, right? We want to make the divine feel more tangible. But theologically speaking, humans are considered the noblest of creations. So for a human to bow down to an animal or a stone or a tree that was literally created to serve humanity, it's viewed as a profound inversion of the natural order.
There's this fascinating historical incident known as Dot and Wat that brilliantly illustrates this point. During a military campaign, some new believers saw others who had this sacred tree where they would hang their weapons to get blessings. Seeking that same tangible comfort, these new believers went and asked Prophet Muhammad for their own sacred tree. And he firmly and quite angrily rejected this. He told them they were trying to return to the ignorant practices of the past. It just goes to show how even the subtle, maybe well-intentioned act of assigning a spiritual, supernatural blessing to a physical object is entirely condemned.
Take this famous question posed by Prophet Ibrahim, or Abraham. He directly challenged his people's logic by asking how they could carve a statue with their own 2 hands and then just turn around and worship it as a deity. It perfectly highlights this profound disconnect. You simply cannot create your own creator.
That brings us to Section 3, elevating humans and prophets and the limits of veneration.
So, moving up the hierarchy of creation from objects and animals, this exact same strict rule is applied to human beings. In this framework, all humans are fundamentally equal. Piety and God consciousness are really the only true differentiators. In fact, prostrating or bowing in worship to any human, whether they're a mighty king, a spiritual guru, or even a spouse, is strictly forbidden. Furthermore, prophets are viewed as the absolute most noble of humans, but they are just that, mortals. The theology specifically references Jesus, known as Isa, and it points out a very grounded, almost surprising reality. He ate food. Now, why is that specific detail so important to mention? Because needing food signifies physical dependence. It's biology. It's a human necessity. And that reliance completely contradicts the independent, self-sustaining nature that is absolutely required of a deity.
This concept actually culminates in a very vivid future dialogue described on Judgment Day. God directly asked Jesus if he ever commanded people to worship him or his mother, and Jesus immediately denies it. He essentially clears himself of demanding any worship whatsoever, reaffirming that he only ever told people to worship the one Creator. Prophet Muhammad also explicitly warned his followers not to overpraise him or elevate him past his status as just a servant and a messenger, precisely to avoid falling into this exact theological trap.
Now, wait a minute, this brings up a fascinating theological nuance. If we can't ask a revered saint for supernatural help, why is it perfectly fine to ask a friend for a loan or ask a neighbor to help lift a heavy box? Isn't that asking a creation for help?
Section 4 provides the answer to that puzzle: the living versus the dead and their crucial distinctions.
So, asking a living person for help within their normal physical capacity is completely permitted. It's a concept called asbab, basically the natural, everyday system of cause and effect. For instance, there's a historical example from the life of Prophet Musa, or Moses, where a man from his side asked him for physical help in a fight, and Musa stepped in and helped him. But asking the deceased crosses the line into shirk. Why? Because their connection to this physical world is entirely severed by a barrier known as barzakh.
Think of it like this. If you fall into a well, shouting for a passerby to throw you a rope makes perfect sense, right? They have the physical, biological ability to hear you, find a rope, and pull you up. But if you fall into that well and start praying to a saint buried 1,000 miles away to physically save you, well, now you are assigning divine qualities of being all-hearing, all-seeing, and capable of supernatural intervention to a human being.
When a person dies, their ability to perform actions just ends, and they enter a completely different dimension. In fact, according to the texts, only 3 very specific things continue to benefit them after they pass away. An ongoing charity they established, like say, a well they built that still gives water. Useful knowledge they left behind that still educates people. Or a righteous child who prays for them. It's actually quite a beautiful concept when you think about it. But beyond those 3 specific avenues, their door to the physical world is closed tight. The Quran explicitly states that the dead cannot hear the calls of the living. They're totally unaware. So relying on them to alter events in the physical world is fundamentally elevating them to a divine status.
And that brings us to our final point, Section 5, the ultimate conclusion: worship only Allah.
The overarching message here is incredibly clear and totally uncompromising. Absolute reliance, worship, and prayers must bypass all creations, whether it's a sacred stone, a towering tree, an animal, a righteous saint, or even the most beloved prophets. They are all ultimately creations. True worship must go directly, without any middlemen or intermediaries, to the Creator alone.
It leaves us with a really profound thought to reflect upon. When we look around at various cultural and societal practices throughout history, it is fascinating to consider how easily human admiration and just deep-rooted tradition can blur the line between simply honoring someone or something and completely crossing over into worship. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this deep dive into the theology helped clarify this absolutely crucial boundary for you.